Come on then. Take a seat and have a drink. We can watch life pass on by.
Hello there and welcome to my review of Mortal Shell. Now this is a fantastic Souls-like game. Now the people at Cold Symmetry who made Mortal Shell, they are obviously heavily inspired by From Software. This is a bit of a homage to Dark Souls, and they've really taken the dark fantasy theme and ramped it up. Like, they've really gone for it. It's a Western take on the dark fantasy, but it is heavily influenced by Dark Souls. There are some really fantastical, way out there enemies and bosses. Now when you start the game, you make your way into the swamp area, and from there you're directed to this ruined bell tower like structure. That's where you meet Sister Ganesha for the first time.
What wayward spirit?
If you go up a level in the tower, you come to a little weapon bench where you can upgrade your weapon, and that's where you can meet this creature that gives you your purpose, i.e. going and getting the glands that it wants from defeating the bosses. But if you make your way around up outside the tower, you can come to the vendor, and he has a cat you can pet. When I was petting the cat, I was like, this is 10 out of 10 for me. This is a 10 out of 10. I don't normally rate games with a number, because I just find that a bit ridiculous. But I'm going to make an exception. If you can pet the cat, it's a 10 out of 10. I'm not even joking. It's a 10 out of 10. No, I am joking. But I think when you pet the cat, you should get a little reward, like a bit of resolve or something like that. That would be cool. There's 3 sort of dungeons that branch off from the main swamp area, and they have a mid-boss and a final boss, and they have a checkpoint about halfway through where you can talk to one of the sisters, or Sister Ganesha, I think her name is. I'm just going to call her a sister, just for simplicity's sake. I don't know, I keep calling them sisters, but they're actually called Sister. It serves as a checkpoint really, and she can offer you some items as well. But when you get to her halfway through a dungeon, like, it's a fantastic moment. You're like, yes. So it's like getting to a bonfire in Dark Souls or a lantern in Bloodborne. You get that same feeling. And when you work your way through these 3 dungeons, there are these little quick routes you can open up. You can open up doors, so it makes it easier. If you have to retread the same ground, sometimes you do if you die and you lose all your tar. So this game is definitely very similar to Dark Souls in many respects. It is quite unique in its own way. It has a few different mechanics, like the Hardening Mechanic. There is currencies. There's a tar, which is sort of equivalent to souls in Dark Souls, and you have some glimpses as well, and that's another sort of currency you can get from killing enemies. Sometimes you can pick it up in the environment. Now there's 4 shells. They have their own little skill trees, and you can unlock abilities. You can't really level up the character as such, so you don't have to worry about leveling. You can level up your weapons though. You can make them more powerful. There's 4 weapons in the game you can find, but I definitely advise just finding each of the 4 shells in the swamp initially. That's what I did. I just walked around, found each shell. You can swap between them, and you don't really need to level all of them up. I wouldn't advise you do that. In fact, I'd advise you just level up one of the shells initially, and then you can unlock a fast travel feature, which is like a mask that you can buy from Cesta. Okay, so once you complete a dungeon, you finish the boss, the lights go out sort of thing, and you have to make your way back through the dungeon, and the fast travel mask is disabled for that. So that's kind of good though, because it does force you to work your way back through the dungeon, which is challenging and rewarding when you make it back. Now this is quite a challenging game. I wouldn't say it's up there with From Software games in terms of challenge, but it's a nice challenge. Like, it's still challenging enough to feel rewarding. Now the combat is solid, it's really weighty. There is a parry mechanic that you can level up. You can add special attacks to your weapons, so you can get resolve that builds up over time, and then you can use that to use special attacks that do a lot of damage and stagger enemies. Now the stamina bar, just like in the Souls games, you have to keep an eye on that. You don't want it to get too low, otherwise you're going to be dead in the water and open to attack. Now the skill trees on the shells allow you to sort of enhance the abilities of the shells and add new abilities. I played through the game just with one shell. I did partially level up another shell, but you can definitely go into New Game Plus once you've finished the game and work on those other shells, so there's great replayability there. And one of the things I love about From Software is their world building. They make these incredibly intricate worlds that feel really connected, they feel like real places. There's no maps, so you really have to learn and get familiar with those environments, and it's the same in Mortal Shell. There's no map. I appreciate that. I don't like games where you just follow one waypoint to the next waypoint and you don't really even need to concern yourself with learning the map. You're just following waypoints and it's fine, but I prefer the intimacy of actually having to get to know your way around. And the swamp area is quite big. It sort of serves as a hub area, but it's quite a big area in its own right, and it's all interconnected. After a while you do get familiar with it, and I got sentimental about it. At the end of the game I thought I'll just have a little last walk around the swamp before I move on to New Game Plus. When From Software make a level, they integrate the enemies into the design of the environment. They feel like they should be there, that those enemies belong in that location, and that adds to the sense of history and sense of place. Like, this is once an actual real place that's gone to rack and ruin. You don't quite get that in Mortal Shell. It does feel a bit more gamey. Like, these levels, they are very intricate, they're beautifully designed, there is a lot of detail in them, but they do feel like they were created for you just to sort of battle your way through, you know, like a dungeon crawler. Some of the levels do feel quite open. There's one level where you go up and it's all open and it's all on these little ledges, and it can be a bit frustrating when you fall off the ledges. There's another level where you go deep down, it's like a nice level. And there's another level that's just sort of like fire and iron, and it's more kind of flat. So there's good verticality to some of the levels, and I really enjoyed that. But they do feel a bit more gamey than From Software. The enemy placement, there's a lot of enemies, they just feel as though they're just randomly put through the environment. There's a lot of ambushes, you know, you go through a narrow corridor that opens up into a bigger room, and they love to put enemies either side to ambush you, or enemies above you that drop down on you. They do that time and time again. It is a bit overused. You kind of expect it. You can run past most enemies, just like in Dark Souls, but if you do that, of course, you're not going to be farming the materials that you're going to need to level up your shells and your weapons. But it does mean if you do get killed and you drop all your tar, and you need to get back to where you died to pick it up again, and that's kind of like the risk-reward factor that makes these games so exciting and frustrating but cool. But yeah, you can dodge past lots of the enemies. You can outrun them quite easily, but you can easily get ambushed or overrun. So you have to be quite careful that you don't just go run crazy through the level trying to get your tar, because it probably won't end well for you. Even though only a small team of people worked on this game, like 15-20 people, they've done an amazing job with the texturing, the detailing, the modelling work. I mean, look at these characters. They just look incredible, amount of detail. And I love the fact that they're using the Unreal Engine 4, because it allows them to concentrate just on making the gameplay and the lore and the design, rather than worrying about trying to create an engine as well, which would have been too much. And also, it's fantastic engine anyway, and it looks great. I mean, this is the thing about From Software, that they have their own engine and it has its positives and negatives. One of the negatives is the frame pacing on the From Software engine isn't great, and also the games look a bit washed out colour palette wise, whereas with the Unreal Engine the colours in this game are so rich and vibrant, and I really appreciated that. There seems to be more colour variety, more colour depth, more contrast, and the areas, they're just so atmospheric, just like a Dark Souls game. They've captured the atmosphere, especially when it all goes foggy. When you've defeated a boss, when you come back through the swamp, it's all really foggy and the enemies are more challenging, and that's another cool idea to mix up the gameplay. Now there's a nice variety in the enemies as well. You might think with a small team that asset's going to be overused. I never felt like that. This feels like a AAA quality game, but it's not in the same scope as a From Software game like Dark Souls or Bloodborne. They just haven't got the people to do that, and so they've been very judicious with the way that they have used their resources. They're obviously very talented, hard-working people, because it is staggering how much work they've done with such a small team, and I can't wait to see what Cold Symmetry do next. Now, because it's a smaller game, it's quite small in scope, it is much more digestible, much more manageable. If you haven't got the time to play like a big epic game like Bloodborne, then yeah, this is a great way to experience a Souls game without overcommitting yourself if you haven't got the time. If you feel like, I can't start playing Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Sekiro, I'm never going to have time to finish them, this, you will have time to finish it. Now, you could say do half a dungeon an evening. Like you could say make your way to the first sister halfway through each dungeon, and then maybe the next evening you could go from the sister to the boss, and then the next evening beat the boss, and then the next evening, make your way back to the central area, and then do it over again for the other 3 dungeons. That's basically what I did. Now the final boss is fantastic. I had a brilliant time with the final boss. I'm not going to show you the final boss because that is quite a big spoiler, but yeah, if you want to know what the final boss is like, I do have a final boss fight guide, so if you get stuck on the final boss or you want to know what the final boss looks like, the mechanics of it, how it compares to say a Dark Souls boss, then you can check out that video. Now there is a frog in the swamp and you can feed him materials and he will give you different shades for your shells. That's pretty cool. I have a video on that as well. That's actually the Rotten Autumn update that came out over Halloween, but it's still active. You can still feed the frog. Now near the frog there's a guy called Baghead, and if you talk to him and give him some items, he gives you an interesting choice. So definitely look out for him. He's near where the frog is. And also in the swamp area there's this monument you can find. It's hidden away again near where the frog is, and that will allow you to play the game without a shell. I mean, you can play the game without a shell, but it kind of locks you into that. You play the whole game without a shell and you're incredibly vulnerable. My hat goes off to people that finish this game without using one of the shells. Okay, now the mechanic that really makes Mortal Shell stand out is the Hardening Mechanic. And to do that, you just hold down one of the buttons on your controller and you harden, and you keep that button pressed down for as long as you want, and you'll stay hardened until you're hit, and then you'll tank that damage and often stagger the enemy so you can get in some attacks yourself. Now in the Dark Souls games you tend to roll around a lot and you can do that here for sure because your hardening mechanic is on a cooldown, but the idea is to make the maximum use of that hardening mechanic. There's 4 shells that you can choose as well, so rather than having one character and you can level up the character and level up the stats, there's 4 shells with their own sort of preset stats. You have an agile character, you have like a tank character, you have sort of your mid-range sort of character like Harros is the shell that I used. Yeah, he's a good shell, he's well balanced defense and attack. So he has kind of sort of a mid-range durability, stamina, and resolve. Like resolve allows you to do special attacks. Now you can build up the resolve as you're hitting and killing enemies. There is another character with loads of agility. He's like a thief-like character. He's got like a hood on. Teal, the acolyte. And then you've got Solomon, the scholar. And he's like a heavy shell. He's got high resolve, so you can do lots of special attacks. But he's got sort of middling stamina. And final option is like the tank character. He's a really sort of heavy, high durability shell with low resolve and stamina. He's like the tank. He moves slowly, but you can take a load of the damage. So that definitely allows you to mix up your playstyle, choose a shell that suits you, and then max out the skill tree on that shell. And the models themselves, each character, they're so beautifully designed. These are some of the best 3D models and textured models I've ever seen. I mean, just look at these, they're just fantastic. Now, just like in Dark Souls, there are a few NPC characters you can interact with in a limited fashion, a very limited fashion. They are fully voice acted, and the voice acting is excellent.
Perhaps it was always yours. If you manage to extract the true nectar, be wary.
There's only a few of them, but they are worth keeping an eye out for. There's a corrupted version of Sesta, which is hidden away somewhere. Now, once you've beat the first dungeon, you'll get the swamp go all foggy, but there is a guy you can interact with that can actually make the fog go away or reappear, so you can tackle the harder enemies in the foggy swamp. And there's these little statues dotted around in the foggy swamp, and they actually give you more items to collect. And it's definitely worth battling your way through the foggy swamp to get those items. And he also has a brother that you should be able to find as well. It's quite easy to find though. Now, I mentioned that the level design was quite gamey. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Making the levels a bit more abstract, it does make the game feel a bit more unique as compared to, say, Dark Souls. And it's not that there isn't a lot of lore behind the game. There is. There's a lot of effort that's gone into building the lore behind the game. It's there, and how much of that you really sort of take on board is up to you. It all depends how much you pay notice to the dialogue in the game and how you try and interpret it. And it is definitely obscured. It is open to interpretation, and that's deliberate on Cold Symmetry's part. Again, they are inspired by From Software, and I prefer that rather than following a sort of set narrative. You really feel like it's your story, like you're just exploring this world and meeting these characters, and you finding your own purpose. I mean, there is a character in the game that gives you a purpose, but you don't feel as though you're kind of forced into doing it. It just feels natural. So if you're looking for a game with a strong narrative, character development, branching storylines, dialogue trees, this isn't for you. Now, the audio in the game is excellent. It's really well designed, really atmospheric. There isn't really music as such, but not that's memorable anyway. There is a alternate soundtrack for the boss's rock music soundtrack that's part of the Rotten Autumn update, and you can activate that if you like a bit of rock music when you're fighting your bosses. But what is a lot of fun is there's a lute that you can pick up and you can play different tunes on it. And what's nice is the enemies seem to like it as well. They come flocking towards you so you can bait the enemies with it. And even Sesta Ganesha, she seems to really like it as well. Now, the Baghead character I mentioned earlier, he gives you an interesting choice, and I've not come across it in another game before. And he just basically says to you, what is the point? You know, let's just opt out. Let's just hang out together, play some tunes on the lute, and eat rats and drink moonshine, watch the world go by. It's cool, but it's also quite profound. You can opt out of the game just like you can opt out in life. You know, you can just say, why stress? why try? Let's just chill out, and you can do that in the game. There's little touches like that that make you appreciate the game and all the work that's gone into it. That this is really a labour of love for Cold Symmetry. This is the game that they always wanted to make, I think. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling on because I love this game. I hope you play it. Thanks, and see you in the next video.